In 2005, I went to the School of Infantry. I didn't always appreciate being surrounded by privates and PFCs as a sergeant, but I did meet one Marine in particular, John Hale. He was a very well-rounded kid. It was obvious he came from a good family. He took his job very seriously. He looked out for me and I looked out for him. He was one of the handful of young Marines in SOI that I will never forget. And at the time I went through boot camp and some of my basic combat training, we were always told, all you Marines are going to war together. Well, when I went through SOI, they said the same thing and they meant it. John Hale went to his first unit, went to Iraq, and never came home. I also found this year after I got home, a Marine Corps death notice for a friend of mine from boot camp I didn't realize was still in, Staff Sergeant Stephen Murphy, 36 years old. My company deployed on its own and attached to the 3rd LAR 1st Marine Division, an active duty unit. We came home and were greeted by our battalion Sergeant Major, Robert Cottle. The Sergeant Major was recently killed in Afghanistan. The rest of the battalion left for Afghanistan as we were coming back home. He and his driver were killed by an IED in Afghanistan. His driver was Lance Corporal Rick Santini, 19 years old, and the Sergeant Major was 45 years old. He was an LAPD SWAT officer. Other members of my battalion that aren't going to come home, my battalion just got home this weekend, the rest of my battalion. Lance Corporal Nigel Olson, 21, Corporal Carlos Aragon, 19, and joining them are Sergeant David Smith, Lance Corporal Jeremy Kane, and on January 23rd, Lance Corporal Greg McDonald took his Navy corpsman with him to guard Heaven's Gates for the rest of us. On January 24th of this year, Lance Corporal Zachary Smith of Hornell, New York, died in Afghanistan. Reserve units, active duty inspector instructor staff divides New York State into sectors. And those sectors determine what burial honors they are going to attend and support for active duty military Marines that don't make it home from their deployment. While they do a good job, they have a lot of work to do sometimes, but they can't make every funeral service. But one organization among us does, and that's the Patriot Guard Riders. I learned of Lance Corporal Zachary Smith's funeral from Patriot Guard Rider Captain Tim Yetter, and I'm impressed. Brian Donnelly got me on their email list. I've gotten notifications and I see how much work those guys put into it, and it's amazing. They escort fallen Marines and other military members all around New York State. They take a lot of time off from work. They take a lot of time communicating to make a good show of support, and that's really what it's all about. When I got home, I was greeted by my family up in Syracuse, and I held that together. It'd been a while. We went through some heartbreaking times. I wasn't allowed to call and email home all the time, didn't have access to that stuff. So it was very nice seeing my wife and my children and my parents there. But one thing that did kind of get to me was seeing Barry Alexander and Brian Donnelly from PENN YAN, New York, Patriot Guard Riders. So I would like to thank, and I think we owe the Patriot Guard and the Legion Riders a big applause. I think it's appropriate that we could take a couple seconds to honor my father-in-law, Sergeant Mike DeFazio, was in Charlie Company 1-9. Those of you who have read any books or know anything about 1-9, they were referred to as the Walking Dead in Vietnam. So I think we could take just a few brief seconds to honor his fallen comrades. In closing, thank you all for being here today. And I'd like to thank God for my life and the green grass that's around us in Yates County, for my family. Semper Fi, and God bless the United States Marines.
It's always kind of a sad note on every Veterans Day to read the roll of our deceased comrades since we last gathered together to celebrate Memorial Day. And this year, the list is again long. Lois Abel, Merrill Bud Ashbrook, Kenneth Bailey, Donald Barcliffe, Henry Batsler, John Brzezinski, Carlton Burt, Reuben Carter, Earl Kastner, Einer Christensen, Leon Coolbaugh, Claude Cornish, William Crane, Claude Crippen, David Curtin, Mark Dickerson, Richard Dixon, Walter Dury, Carlton Elling, Donald Ferguson, James Foster, William Gallagher, Warner Gibbs, Charles Chuck Graves, David Hall, Claude Ham, Roy Hathaway, James Hoglet, Warren Houston, James Howell, Frank Ilnicki, Harold Insko, Robert Irwin, Frederick Kurz, Gary Lemke, Harold Lobert, David Lawrence, Lois McDowell, William McCormick, Terry McMichaels, Howard Milliman, James Morrissey, Paul Nelson, Willard Nelson, Robert Nielsen, George Osborne, Floyd Paddock, John Paddock, Charles Phelan, David Rowe, Fred Rogers, Albert Santee, James Swingle, Chris Serafine, Arthur Shoemaker, John Smith, Robert Swanson, James Swartout, Robert Feely, Elliot Gorse, William Wax, Ray Wink, Gloria Woodard, David Woodruff, Robert Yerkes, Tommy Youngs. May their souls rest in peace. Mr. MC, that completes the reading of the roll.
to thank you all for attending. And it's, once again, I want to say we're very gratified with the showing of our great citizenry here to honor our war fallen. Let us never forget that freedom is not free. May God bless our service women and men, and may God bless America. Thank you very much.